The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. TIAA makes you a retirement promise, a promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. Learn more at TIAA.org/promises pay off.
LinkedIn presents.
We each, in each of our behaviors and our choices, have the opportunity to either disrupt or perpetuate the culture of silence on our teams, in our organizations, or in our homes. Because while silence breeds silence, the converse is also true. Voice inspires voice.
Hi, this is the Next Big Idea Daily. I'm your host, Michael Kovnat, and it's Monday. Have you ever kept silent when you should have spoken up? Like when you saw someone being treated unfairly or when you yourself were mistreated? Most of us have kept our mouths shut when we really should have said something. And that's because in some ways we've been trained to keep silent, to not make waves. Here to help is Elaine Lin Hering, author of the new book, Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. Elaine is a facilitator, speaker, and writer who's worked with leaders at some of the country's biggest companies. Formerly, she was a lecturer at Harvard Law School, specializing in dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation. Here she is to share some of her big ideas.
Well-intentioned leaders often tell the people on their team, "Speak up, you've got to share what you really think." Or, "Tell me what's going on before things get bad." And yet, only half of people report always speaking their minds at work. Despite invitations and urging, and even coaching and performance reviews to speak up more, people still don't. I'm one of those people. If I had a dime for every time someone told me to speak up or to speak louder, I'd be retired by now. Having taught negotiation and communication at a firm founded out of the Harvard Negotiation Project, I used to give out the same advice. Speak more clearly, speak more directly, use this phrase or that phrase. But that advice always felt unsatisfying and at times irresponsible. Telling someone to just speak up ignores the real and perceived costs of them sharing what they really think. Because we can't control whether the other person will get defensive, decide to retaliate against us, or start leaving us off the meeting invites, it often seems safer not to say anything at all. Instead of telling people just to speak up, we need to take an honest look at how we silence ourselves, silence the people around us, and how the systems around us support some people while silencing others. If you're a leader, instead of telling people to speak up, start by asking yourself, in what ways might I be silencing them? We all silence people. Some of you might be thinking, that's not me. I don't silence people. I'm an inclusive, thoughtful leader. I always tell people that my door is always open. I've worked really hard to open up the lines of communication. But also consider that most of us have been rewarded for staying silent. It's easier if people don't rock the boat. It makes things more efficient if they don't disagree, at least in the short term. Oftentimes, we reward people for being easy to work with, which really means not pushing back or offering dissenting opinions. So, if you're human, you silence people. I do it, you do it. Instead of getting stuck in guilt or self-flagellation over how we might have impacted people negatively when we didn't mean to, let's look carefully at the ways that we might incline other people towards silence. Being aware of how silence happens, even when unintentional, allows us the opportunity to make different choices going forward. We incline people towards silence when we default to our own communication preferences, instead of considering what might support their voice. If we aren't actively designing our communication flows, the communication mediums and times of day that we use and that we choose likely play to our own strengths and silence those who don't share those strengths. When a meeting is scheduled and how it is typically run tends to support the preferences of those with the most power or the most senior leader. You could call it flexible work, time shifting, or any number of phrases. But if you're asking someone to join a meeting at 4 a.m. local time or 11:30 p.m. in their time zone, we can't possibly expect them to be firing on all cylinders. Working globally and across time zones means that there's no perfect time zone. But when and how we choose to hold meetings or engage makes it either easier or harder for people to show up well. Do you know whether the people you work with process information best by talking it out in real time or going away and thinking about it? Is it easiest for them to communicate by talking or by typing or something else? Is phone, video, messaging, email, in person, their preference, what makes it easiest for them to share what they really think and bring forth their best insights? It's not to say that you then have to conform to what works best for them, but that actively designing the way that you communicate then optimizes for voice. These are barriers to sharing our thoughts that are easily reduced. Social and organizational psychologists have long identified employee silence as an issue. Employee silence is an academic term for when employees don't share insights that could benefit the organization. Whether it's at work or at home, we as human beings tend to observe, how do things work around here? If we look around and we see that no one, particularly leaders, is talking about the real issues, pushing back, or speaking up, then we conclude that we don't talk about those things here, and a culture of silence takes over. Organizational silence, defined as the collective phenomenon of saying nothing in response to problems that an organization faces, then becomes a reality. Consider this client. They brought me in to do a training on difficult conversation skills for their staff. Global organization, in diagnostic call after diagnostic call, trying to get a sense of what was going on with the people, with the team, and with the organization, I kept hearing them say, we just don't talk about things here. And it wasn't that there was an organizational value or a communicated policy of we don't talk about the difficult issues. It was that over time, people had observed that no one on the executive team actually pushed back against the executive director. And from that behavior, the conclusion was, well, if senior leadership can't even push back on the number one person who holds the highest ranking title in this organization, then how can I, as someone lower on the org chart, be able to push back at all? Their conclusion was, well, we then need to upskill people in how to have difficult conversations. While that skill set is useful, the bigger skill set that unlocks our ability to negotiate, have difficult conversations, give and receive feedback is to understand the role of silence on our teams and how the behaviors of senior leadership, their willingness to be public in their disagreement, their debate, their dissent, either influences a culture of silence or of voice. But as easy as it is to point to senior leaders and put the onus on them, we each, in each of our behaviors and our choices, have the opportunity to either disrupt or perpetuate the culture of silence on our teams, in our organizations, or in our homes. Because while silence breeds silence, the converse is also true. Voice inspires voice. The more we see people using their voices, talking about the things that really matter, the more voice becomes the norm. If you doubt it, Google Derek Sivers' TED Talk on how to start a movement and dive into the theory of the first follower. Essentially, the behavior of the first follower helps craft what becomes the norm. Are your choices, your behaviors, perpetuating or disrupting a culture of voice? Are your choices and behaviors perpetuating silence or perpetuating voice? Whenever people ask me, well, how do I actually speak up? They're hoping that I'll provide them a script. And as much as I'd like to, and as much as other people offer a script means that we aren't prepared to engage the unknown that inevitably comes up in the process of using our voices. So instead of a script, I offer 4 anchors. These anchors are touch points and guidelines that help us understand why we'd even speak up in the first place and how we can be most effective in the conversation. Anchor number 1. Start with why. Why would you take the risk to say something? What issue, what relationship, what idea makes it worth it to you to raise your voice and work through the potential discomfort of figuring out what to say? Is it because you care more about justice or about this relationship that you're willing to say something? Anchoring to the why connects to our emotional brain, not just to our logical brain. And this is behavior change research from Keegan and Leahy of having a reason that is more important to you for why you need to change means that you're more likely to change even when it's tough. Second, connect the dots. As much as we would love for everyone to be able to read our minds and think about things just the way that we do, it's just not possible. So instead of assuming that they see things just the way that you do and have access to the data that you do, spell out what you've observed, what meaning you're making of it, and then inquire of them how they might see it differently. Connect the dots. Third, make your ask clear. So often when we speak up, the other person or other people want to be supportive, want to be responsive to us. But in the way that we're making the ask, they're not sure exactly how that's possible. If you're looking for a good YouTube video, It's Not About the Nail highlights this dynamic in a perfect, hilarious way. Do you want the other person to just listen? Do you want them to partner with you in problem solving? Do you want them to empathize? Do you want them to be a thought partner? If you can make the ask clear to them as to what you're looking for, they're more likely to be able to be responsive in a way that is helpful to you. Fourth anchor, embrace resistance. So many of us become discouraged, demotivated, and conclude that speaking up doesn't work when the other person or people show resistance. When they get defensive, when they ask questions, when they don't immediately agree with us. Know that resistance is a natural part of the process of using your voice. That awareness means that when the resistance shows up, you're less likely to be rocked or triggered by it. Instead, it's, oh, there's that resistance. And also, resistance is engagement. They haven't yet said no. So unpack the resistance to understand what their concerns are and how you might be able to get to yes from there. Speaking up is not linear, but as the waves of discomfort and doubt arise, you now have 4 anchors to hold on to. Start with why, connect the dots, make the ask clear, and embrace resistance. Too often, we make the mistake of believing that voice is just the words that we say in a meeting, and that if you miss the moment in the meeting because the conversation has moved on, that you've missed your shot in making an impact. But voice is more than the words that you say in a meeting. Your voice is how you move through the world. From robocallers to family members to well-intentioned colleagues and mentors, other people are going to try to influence how you move through the world. But their feedback, advice, and will for your life is just input. It can be part of your data set rather than definitive for how you choose to show up. And because we're different human beings, it only makes sense that we would have different ways of moving through the world. Our families of origin, gender, race, ethnicity, education, class, abilities, experiences all shape how we move through the world. Rather than try to be a good imitation of someone else, figure out how you want to show up, who you want to be. Some questions that help you figure that out are, what do you care about? If you have one life to live, how do you want to live it? And then what does that look like in your day-to-day?
Okay, thank you, Elaine. That does it for us today, everyone. You can get a copy of Elaine's book, Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully at your favorite bookstore. Tomorrow, I'll be joined by Next Big Idea Club favorite Stephen Johnson, who will share some ideas from his book, Extra Life, A Short History of Living Longer. I'm Michael Kovnat. See you tomorrow.